All right, guys. TJ Dishaw is the CEO of Peerless VR, a company focused on advancing immersive technology solutions for law enforcement and public safety. He dropped out of Michigan State University to start Apex Officer, one of, if not the first virtual reality platform designed specifically for police training, where he pioneered the shift from static scenario-based systems to immersive decision-making, decision-driven training environments. His work has centered on improving how officers train for real-world situations, emphasizing decision-making, communication, and de-escalation rather than traditional shoot, don't shoot frameworks. Through both Apex Officer and now Peerless VR, TJ has contributed to the broader adoption of portable, instructor-led VR systems that allow agencies to conduct scalable, repeatable, and high-fidelity training. At Peerless VR, he continues to focus to bridge the gap between technology and real-world performance, building systems that support multi-user training, real-time instructor control, consequence integration, and curriculum aligned with modern police challenges. TJ, welcome to the Champion's Path. Anything that you'd like to add to that?
No, that was actually great. It sounds like there's definitely some info pulled somewhere. That was very accurate.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, no, it's definitely intriguing, and I'd like to go into our first segment on the mission and the origin story. So, if you wouldn't mind, tell us about the genesis of Apex Officer. I mean, you dropped out of Michigan State, so if you can set the stage, where what were you studying, and why did you start this company?
Yeah, great question, and appreciate the opportunity in general, and thanks for having me. So to start, it's fairly long-winded, but I always try my best to make those a little more concise and a little bit more digestible for sure. So yeah, essentially, at 18, I got into Michigan State University. Big deal for me and my family at the time. Went there as a freshman and ended up being there for about 2 years. I was studying computer engineering, and actually what I found was I was doing pretty poor in school because I was so obnoxiously obsessed with computers. I had been my whole life. I was always a nerd, despite playing sports and being pretty normal and all that. I was just fascinated with technology, and now that I was living without my parents, I literally would go to class and sit on my phone and read computer forums about graphics cards and GPUs and game engines and computer graphics in general. So I've always just been nothing but floored and fascinated. And what I found through that as time went on is I had met up with an old friend I had grown up with. I had just got a VR headset because I had been studying and looking into it for quite a while. And, long story short, I ended up getting the HTC Vive the day it came out, tried it, and was just floored. I remember putting on the headset with my former business partner at the time because we were kind of talking about ideas, using it and whatnot. And putting on the headset and seeing the controller on the floor 3, 4, 5 feet away from me and going, wait. And that first step where I actually leverage sixed off technology, right? The fact that I can actually move rotationally with my head, but also positionally, and go and grab the controller without seeing my hand, was the aha mind-blowing moment for me. I think that was 2015 or 2016, whatever the Vive was out. I don't remember the exact itinerary. So from there I went heads down on trying to figure out how do we make a VR solution or find some use for it, because the technology, again, was just amazing at the time. So my former business partner had a father in law enforcement and an uncle, and I had an uncle in the FBI as well. So I wasn't totally unfamiliar, and we kind of put 2 and 2 together to, not hopefully exaggerate the story too much. We essentially from there moved across the country, dropped everything, dropped out of college, etc., to be able to start the dream. We had went through a startup accelerator in Iowa. And then we got into another one in 2017, July of 2017. And then we went through another accelerator called Boost VC out in San Mateo, California. And if you've ever seen the show Silicon Valley, I mean, it was like this in a nutshell. You had all these crazy tech founders around you. Everyone's kind of psycho in some ways, myself included. I at least like to throw that out there just to make it fair for everyone. And everything about it was just mind blowing. It was really cool to see, these people who are super passionate about technology. So that was really our big scale point, because it got us not only actually a very small amount of investment money, but it allowed us to connect with law enforcement agencies. So, it was just me and my business partner at the time. I was the tech guy. I built everything, product, hardware, software, everything, but I also did the sales. He got them in the door, to be fair to him, but I did the sales, and I did the sales pitches. which I don't even like coining it that way, because at the time, really, it was a discovery phase. We would bring agencies in, ask them about the technology, et cetera. It would eventually turn into a sales pitch in some ways, but really the main point beyond trying to sell them was we wanted folks to adopt the technology to get more hands-on data. How does it actually work? What do you folks need, et cetera? What was really cool, though, is putting people into virtual reality was mind-blowing for myself, because coincidentally or ironically, they would go in, put on the headset and go, this exists, right? So their mind being blown, extrapolated and by extension came to my mind being blown on what it enabled them to do, right? So I think a lot of folks nowadays go, VR is immersive. Yeah, no doubt, but it's a lot of what it is enabling other facets of training that we never even considered, right? The fact that you have sixed off, well, now you can peek around a corner. Now you can pie a corner tactically, right? Now you can walk through buildings. Stuff like that was super powerful. So within even our first year of actually founding the company, we were able to close 2 deals with law enforcement agencies, which are super powerful. In fact, one of those agencies, the guy I worked with at the agency who retired as a captain, now is one of my VPs at my company. So having that kind of backstory and pedigree on our team already has been super powerful. So anyway, to kind of make a long story short, on at least the beginning of Apex, a lot of it was just discovery. I wasn't totally familiar with law enforcement, despite having an uncle in the FBI and whatnot, and our other backgrounds. But it was seeing people adopt the technology and just seeing how immersive it was. Now, a big difference that we did at Apex, and we did for several years at Apex and now at Peerless, is I was realizing that we were trying to do AI really early, right? Let's have AI voice lines. And you actually see Axon do that to this day. But what I found, and don't get me wrong, AI wasn't there back then, and it still isn't in this regard, actually, despite being an avid user of it, is the responses. So in your traditional projector-based legacy simulators for 30 plus years, older than me now, we've seen these systems that are scenario-based. They have branching options. You and I talked about it prior. They're very basic. They're shoot or don't shoot at the most basic level. And what VR allowed them and enabled them to do is, beyond it, again, being hyper immersive, is it allows it to be driven by software instead, because it's rendered by a game engine. So we came up with the idea, let's have the trainer talk to a microphone. And that was like the last big feature before we got our first sale. And it's something we've stuck with to this day, right? That was maybe like February, March, April of 2018. When someone walked up and had a conversation with someone, it was a real person talking back and forth, where tonality, inflection, raising your voice, tone can all change on the fly. It created an experience that beyond virtual reality was just something that was untapped and untouched. So Apex Officer was, from what I can tell and what I've been able to know for all the years, was the first VR simulator for law enforcement, something I created way back then. But it transitioned to empowering the trainer, giving them the tools, the ability to control and dictate their training. Right? We became wildly successful. I work all over the U.S. I still, before Apex's demise, if you will, which I'll cover here shortly, I worked very closely with every agency I could. We would have bi-weekly Zoom calls where any agency can hop on and give feedback. I discuss what we're developing, and that way,
it's incredible.
It's such a thank you, and it's such a basic concept. But listen to the end user. What do they actually want, right? Yeah. So we had developed this platform where, yes, hyper immersive, awesome technology, better than everything else, but we give them control and we listen to the end user. And functionally, it has completely changed the industry. And for some reason, a lot still haven't adapted. And it was a big piece of what made Apex Officer special. But overall, it was let them control and dictate their training. Of the thousands of agencies I've worked with, every single agency has obviously a different jurisdiction that they work in, but even beyond that, different curriculum or ways they train, and then sure as heck a different policy. There's a ton of overlap, but having a one-size-fits-all training for all of law enforcement throughout the U.S. is simply naive, and it's something every vendor out there does and sticks to. So Apex Officer changed that. Now, to answer your further question of how that transition looked and how that origin story worked, essentially, as time went on, Apex Officer was an amazing product, and to this day, actually, is still used all over the U.S. and still is used more than a lot of these newer next-gen, somewhat simulators, we'll call them. Essentially, that's companies adopting VR.
Yeah, why do you think that is?
That's a great question. It's because of the open-ended nature. I've talked to several law enforcement agencies, even just this past week. A lot of them I connect with that had Apex Officer. I had so many good relationships at Apex Officer because I really tried to stay boots on the ground and work with them. Is I've been able to connect with them, and many have even demoed a lot of the new systems out there that you see advertised everywhere, VR. I'll just put it this way: that are VR systems. I'm not going to name other companies, and they still went with Apex because it's more capable. And to answer your question, it's because of the open-ended nature. People are using an Apex Officer simulator that's 5, 6, 7 years old. It's definitely outdated hardware and technology wise, still more advanced than the projector stuff by a mile. But because it's open ended, if an OIS happens in that jurisdiction, if they have some kind of scenario that's bizarre or even super commonplace on the other side of the spectrum, an Apex Officer, they still have the ability to go build and recreate that from their fingertips behind a trainer laptop within 30 seconds, within a minute. And that ability alone makes it so they have more ROI on the simulator than any sim ever created, right? You've got your projector-based sim. It does the same thing, and it has for 10 years. Those scenarios stay the same. I mean, they're literally videos they're recording with a camera. So even some of the complaints I heard in the other systems and feedback to this day is that I'll go in my system and 2/3 of the scenarios were recorded in 1994. The lockers look different. No one has cell phones. I mean, these are real world impact variables per se that aren't in those kind of content criteria. So Apex is still to this day actually used very thoroughly because of that reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's incredible, and you touched on a lot of points that we'll uncover and discuss today. But I do want to go back to the technology itself. I mean, what
Yes.
you had mentioned, a lot of agencies are using the Apex X2 platform. You've got a lot of Peerless VR platforms out there. Kind of walk me through, what does the Apex system consist of, and then what's the differentiator between the hardware for the Peerless VR platform?
Yeah, and I appreciate that question because that's going to allow me to touch that Apex to Peerless transition too. So Apex was honestly, a technical marvel in many ways. I built all of it originally myself, hardware, software, literally everything. And now, at Apex, I had an amazing team behind me that eventually ended up doing that, but I still had a huge piece in it, even if I wasn't actually programming myself or doing too much of the hardware. It was a backpack-based platform. No one actually used backpacks. There were some that tried it or did some, we'll say, different flavor of it, but no one really did and stuck to backpacks. Wireless VR was really good, and I was trying it, super early. It just wasn't there. But backpacks also enabled us to go past 3 users because at 60 gigahertz, the wireless frequency, there was only 3 bands essentially. To answer your question though directly, it was base station or lighthouse-based tracking. So you had external tracking sensors. You used an HTC Vive Pro or Vive Pro 2. We sold both throughout the history of the company. We also had a backpack unit, which was a high-end Windows computer with an NVIDIA GPU. So it was bulky. It pulled a lot of power, had batteries on the side. But at the time, and for quite a while, and still in some ways, but not to this exact day, it was the best solution. So it gave you that high-fidelity graphics. It gave you that high frame rate, which is important so people don't get sick. It gave you the immersion factor that was just totally out of this world. We had over-the-ear headphones, which make a big difference. Net as a platform was great because it still set up a lot quicker than the projectors, and it still had that open-ended nature, but it was old, dated technology. So even with high-fidelity tracking and whatnot, you still had a backpack on, and you were still limited to about 30 by 30 feet. So what had happened is, to give that transition period piece, is essentially around 23, 24, early 24 especially, I was seeing the writing on the wall that accessibility is actually the biggest limitation of law enforcement training. I've been trying to broaden my scope. I've become so passionate about empowering law enforcement training, and trying to make a real impact on the world, versus just selling another slot in simulator. And what I've realized is that even with Apex's quick setup, it was like 10, 15 minutes. It was a lot more equipment that you had to lug around, and it had a lot more limitations setup wise because of external tracking. So the accessibility piece, as time has gone on, has actually been what I've found to be the main limitation. Not actually the functionality of the simulator. That's definitely second, and it's a close second. But the accessibility, if you look at a projector-based sim nowadays or another VR simulator, no matter what they tell you, no matter what they show you, anytime they come and do a demonstration, it's a 30-minute setup minimum. Maybe 25 on a good day if all the stars align. And I can tell you that confidently because I have tried firsthand every single major simulator, including all the new ones, including all the new VR ones. I've got a lot of disgruntled customers with buyer's remorse from them who have hopped on and acquired Peerless in the past even just 6 months. So I've tried them
Mhm.
all. I'm actually very familiar with all the simulators out there. They
And
all
that's
take
just
forever
a
to set up.
Yeah, and that's just a barrier to entry. I mean, now you have also
Yes.
the limitations of optimizing the utility of the system, understanding its capabilities, and running a successful holistic simulation. So, yeah, that's definitely one of the biggest pain points.
Yes. So think of it this way: is that with a 30-minute setup time, give or take, on pretty much all
Mhm.
systems, even a lot of your permanent systems, which are totally not portable and have a dedicated room, which is a whole other can of worms, even then, you're still probably looking at a good, I would imagine, 10, 15, 20 minutes at the absolute best in the perfect world. And that's from power on to training. So I realized in late 23, early 24, this was the bottleneck, and we need to innovate. We absolutely need to move past that. We need to move past Apex Officers hardware and take what's great about the software and put it on something next gen. And it's something that my co-founder and I just didn't see eye to eye on. And as time went on, it just became the friction point. So I quit in essentially 2024, and 3 days later, he shut the doors on all my former employees. Really out of
Mhm.
nowhere, he was done with it. And we had kind of seen the writing on the wall. I was building Peerless myself in the background for well over 6 months,
Mhm.
and then come in January 2025, we started Peerless. And the idea was to take such a great functional technology and methodology behind empowering the trainer. Let the agency train themselves, not the vendor. Take that idea and apply it on next gen hardware, but make it accessible, right? So it needs to be more
Mhm.
affordable than other simulators. We have to be creative in how that procurement process is done, and that's something we've done as well, is making it so we're accessible to all law enforcement agencies in the world, or
Mhm.
excuse me, at least in the U.S. or starting in the U.S. Right? I
Mhm.
want every law enforcement agency to have access to world class training. It's what they deserve,
Mhm.
right?
Where's
Law
this
enforcement.
passion come from? I mean, you don't have a law enforcement background. You have family and peers that were law enforcement. But where's the
Yep.
passion come from, and why didn't you put forth that passion into another domain space of education?
Fantastic question. So for starts, I always try to be purposeful in life and actually make an impact, right? What's great
Hmm.
about my job and my career is I've got, depending on how you gauge it, through my own lens, I'll say I have the best job in the world. Not only do I have an amazing team that I work for, or excuse me, work with, but we make a real impact in the world. I can wake up and know that I'm making the world a better place in some ways, right? It might only start small or a smaller scope with law enforcement training right this moment, but what that extrapolates out to is obviously some form of public safety. I mean, making society better. If law enforcement is more well prepared and well trained to deal with any kind of scenario they be put in, then it's a huge benefit to society just on the fact that people are better trained. It goes without saying. But the bigger piece is essentially being able to try to eliminate the tragic outcomes you see in law enforcement, right? On
Hmm.
LinkedIn, I'm there all the time, and what I find is there's so many, in-service deaths or fatalities in law enforcement. I can't fix all of them, but I'm going to try what I can and what we can do to eliminate those through and through. And it starts with Peerless here, making it more accessible. Law
Hmm.
enforcement is expected to perform 95% of the time and train maybe 5% if we're lucky. Whereas if you look at professional athletes, they sit in there and train 98% of the time and perform two, right? You look at
Hmm.
doctors and surgeons and lawyers and judges, and they're again expected to perform at XYZ level. Um, but there's not crazy consequences. In law enforcement, if you aren't perfect, you're expected to be perfect. You aren't. You might literally have your life ruined and thrown in prison. I mean,
Hmm.
that kind of impact has stuck with me. So as I work with these end users, as they give me feedback and tell me, your solution has genuinely changed our agency for the better. People are more prepared
Hmm.
in the way we want them to, has been so impactful that I found that's the reason, in some ways, as cheesy as it is, I was put on earth, right? I want to make
Hmm.
a real impact on the world. I'm only here for maybe 80 years, maybe 90 if I'm lucky. I might as well do something that actually impacts the world versus just going out to make a quick buck and slot in as another simulator.
Mhm. That's incredible. That's a lesson I learned late in life. I joined the Marine Corps not out of passion, but because I love the uniform. And
Hmm.
now it's my life's goal is to give back to the warfighter, and the best way that I've seen is through representation and the advocacy of these simulators. So I definitely can align with your passion. To go to Peerless VR on the technology side. I mean,
Yeah.
now this is the system that can support up to 16 participants, which is unheard of. And I could be mistaken. And this might be poor marketing from the simulation industry or solution vendors, but simulation platforms typically showcase either a individual skill set or individual within the simulator learning a skill set, or perhaps a couple of officers within the scenario. Um, you know, do you see agencies training poorly in terms of team problems and scaling to large incidents? What's the methodology of having 16 participants? My military mind goes to field training exercises, large scale, force on force. On a law enforcement perspective, I mean, where are we looking at? Active shooters, hostage rescue, riot control. Walk me through the hardware and then the thought process of scaling to 16 participants.
Yeah, fantastic question. So yeah, definitely a lot of the things you outlined towards the end as far as direct use cases. And 16, don't get me wrong, is definitely on the extreme side of the spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
but we intentionally design our system in that way, right? I have all the time I get feedback where folks have used the system in a way I've never thought of, but again, it's because we keep the platform open-ended where, a trainer can come in and create some very specific training and leverages these features of the simulator because once again, it's kind of a sandbox essentially, right? So we can actually do 16 trainers and 16 trainees. It's a power of two number. So for the nerds
Mm-hmm.
out there, yeah, it's just kind of an arbitrary limit. We could really push it to 32, 64, whatever. Probably not too much practicality after 10, but we have the technology to do it. And the idea behind it is that, again, it comes down to efficiency. I don't necessarily see problems in training, and nor do I look at it that way. I'm very gung ho with my non-law enforcement background, despite my entire adult career working with law enforcement and law enforcement agencies and professionals. I'm not one to dictate their training, so I don't see necessarily a limitation. However, the limitation I see is again the frequency and the accessibility to said training. Right? Again, if we only get so much time in a day, an agency has only so many resources, only so much funding, which even comes back to the taxpayer. We're saving the money in this way. Is if we have the ability to go and let's even just use a lower number, like something which is still ridiculous, would be 8 trainees in the headset, right? Maybe there's your
Mm-hmm.
tactics or SWAT team, whatever you want to call it. Being able to do that in an office environment, or excuse me, in the PD building, sheriff's offices building, or going outside, or going into a warehouse, which a lot of agencies happen to have for some of their equipment and whatnot, and be able to set it up and go through that without needing to go to a physical location, without needing to go to a shoot house, without needing to do
Mm-hmm.
all the crazy simulation stuff, which still has value, is really where we come in. That's the efficiency piece, not the fidelity of the training. We'd knock that out of the
Mm-hmm.
park too, but it's more so how accessible can we make it? How efficient can we make it? How do we change law enforcement training for the greater good? And a big piece of that, again, is the resources it takes. Training's hard, expensive,
Mm-hmm.
time consuming, requires a lot of bodies. Well, we might as well, alleviate that bottleneck as much as possible. And that's, really, again, one of our big missions at Peerless.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Let's go into the curriculum, the human performance and decision making aspects.
Mm-hmm.
You're very explicit about training for communication and integrating assessment decision making. I'd imagine every agency has common training protocols. Um, but how do you account for the nuances of geographic locations and differences, demographic differences, site specific policies and situations? So talk to us about the requirements that drive the courseware curriculum, and you've really alluded to the end user feedback, which is incredible, rather than this good idea fairy or the SMEs that kind of dominate at the solution provider that create what they think is kind of a one size fits all. So talk me through the pre-canned scenarios, if the platform has pre-canned scenarios versus a scenario creation tool.
Yeah, fantastic question. You're on a roll here. So with that in mind, you already outlined obviously a big difference is, again, we reinvented in a lot of ways how training criteria was done and let alone digested in a training simulator. And no one has mimicked that for whatever reason. I think a lot of folks just continuously try to slot into the simulator hole, if you will, or slot when it comes to becoming a vendor. Any new VR company you've seen pop up, they just slot in and do the same thing, but hey, now it's VR and it's a little bit more portable. Like, that's cool. And I actually give credit where it's due for the innovation, but it's not rethinking the training, right? You see other big companies do this where their mission is bigger than the initial objective that the current industry is tackling. And whether it encompasses this industry or it's completely adjacent to it, we have to think bigger. And what I saw at Apex really, really early on, again, was that the one size fits all doesn't work. So do we have canned scenarios? No. However, we do have what we called built-in presets. So essentially, the platform is not built off your just raw scenario, right? When you go into really any simulator, you load a scenario. And I'll say semantically, you can do that in Peerless in some ways, but they're still apples to oranges. So when you go to actually create a scenario in Peerless, you start by choosing an environment. And when you choose that environment, you have your presets on the right. They're going to be ones you've created, and then you have ones we've created that are built in. Many of those are actually made from other law enforcement agencies using Peerless, and then we put them back in there with their permission. So it's a way where our content is actually created by people currently sworn in law enforcement. Right. I don't think you can get closer to boots on the ground or rubber meeting the road than that in a lot of ways. And by doing that, it's still different than, and I promise I'm getting to an answer here, that's still much different than your canned scripted scenarios, let alone with branching options. Because with how ours works is, even if you load a preset, and we'll use the term scenario synonymously here, when you load a scenario in Peerless, the setup may be the same. But because of the role play aspect, the fact that I can talk into a mic as dispatch, as a suspect, as a civilian, let alone control the whole scenario as the puppet master, allows me to be reactive in my responses, not only verbally, but virtually as far as what the character suspect is doing. So what this piece allows is that we can still include content that's generalized despite, talking against that, but still have variance. So for example, many agencies, especially your federal agencies, for whatever reason, they're usually larger, bigger scale, is that they're trying to have consistent training. Now, based on what I've been advocating for here, there's absolutely some irony in that. I don't really like the consistency of the training being the exact same. However, we find that middle ground. So the scenario can be the same. You can go and load a preset, whether we built it or the agency did, and go through it and have 20 people go through it. And every time it's still unique to their experience, unique to their responses, right? Because of the mic input alone, a trainee can walk up and ask, hey, what is your name? One of the most common conversation starters in law enforcement I've seen throughout my entire career is, what is your name? And every simulator fails that. No simulator does that properly. Talking out loud or just role playing with headsets on is not it. That's not going to work. That does not facilitate that immersion of, I'm actually talking to someone in a completely different world. We're the only ones with noise canceling headphones. You can walk up to someone and ask them a question. They're looking you in the eye and they'll respond with a real person behind the suspect. So we absolutely include built-in content, but it's still, if you were to load it, you still can go make changes to the content. And after that, once you're actually in the scenario and running it, it's still different because it's a role play simulator. We've alleviated the bottleneck of use of force or shoot or don't shoot. That's cool. We've been doing that for 35 years now. We do it better than everyone. But in addition to that, we broaden the scope and make it a decision-making simulator. So by opening up those pieces, we can still have I'm not going to call it canned content, but included content, right? We can't put all the work on the end user, but it makes their life so much easier because the training is impactful. Someone can use, just like Apex Officer, someone can use Peerless 10 years down the road from now, and will still adapt to their needs, whether it's new curriculum or new policy or recreating a real world scenario. I had Reno Police Department talk to us the other day, and they said, we had an OIS. It was a guy had a knife with a bridge, and they recreated the scenario pretty much one-to-one and had every single police officer run through that throughout the entire agency. Right? And they did that in a couple hours? They rebuilt the scenario in 45 seconds? I mean, despite running through that same thing, each interaction was unique, and that kind of training is invaluable. So it's the accessibility to set it up quick and make it really fast to hop in the simulator, right? We alleviate the setup. But we also, again, make it open-ended, universal, so that an agency tailors it to what they need, their desires, their requirements, not what the generalized law enforcement training is, whatever that would even be, throughout the US.
Yeah, that's incredible. Shifting from the instructor perspective, this open-ended scenario creation tool, the participant, and their unique experiences. So I play chess daily, and there's a lot
Awesome.
of strategy involved. Various openings, positioning, moves, and counter moves.
Proactive versus reactive.
Yeah, exactly. But ultimately, and this was a conversation I had with our Arcadia Cognerati, but ultimately, the opponent is bound by the same rules as me, and so the strategy and training, reminds me of legacy systems and the branching mechanics. And in reality, people's actions are volatile; they're erratic. Obviously, they don't play by the same rules. So not only is VR more immersive, but today's technology like LLMs or machine learning algorithms, as well as on the fly scenario creation tools, really giving the ability to adjust the capabilities on the fly, can allow instructors to put participants in those realistic scenarios. So tell me about the assailant, the suspect, the NPC. What governs the actions that mimic, the realities of human decisions and actions?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I hope I can respond in a way that makes sense. In our context, right, we use a game engine like any other VR simulator. And ultimately, it comes down to how we design the controls, what kind of inputs do we give you, et cetera, right? So we can dictate where they walk, where they run, the path they walk, the path they run. We can dictate all sorts of different actions, and they're open-ended and universal. So even something like drawing a knife, I can pull any item from my waistband. I should rephrase. I can pull many different items from my waistband, including weapons like a pistol or a knife. I could even threaten suicide with it. But while I can threaten suicide, I can walk around with it still to my head or a knife still to my throat. I can drop things. I can repick them back up. I could throw them at you. I could comply and then weave in and out of compliance. So, without trying to explain all of our controls and how it works, it's high end and high level enough that anyone can hop behind a laptop with a mouse and control it. Right. And we intentionally use a laptop. We want to give you that high fidelity control. Every single person is familiar with a mouse in my experience, in my 8 years of doing this, versus like a tablet. You're going to be poking there. You're going to be very limited in your inputs. So that's really a big piece. And then again, you add in the mic input and it's just a whole nother ball game, right? You can do almost anything with true mic input the way we've integrated, which no one else has done to this day still, which is going to be, again, that tonality, the verbiage. I mean, you can speak different languages. I mean, something I've found powerful, and hopefully I'm not going too off topic here, is that an agency a lot of times has frequent flyers, right? You got the XYZ person, maybe he's homeless, and the officer's going to know him by name. The suspect knows the officer by name. Why don't we just train on stuff like that you actually deal with, right? So an agency does that all the time with our system. With Peerless, they can come in and role play as someone they deal with in their jurisdiction, maybe on a weekly, monthly basis, whatever it is.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. I mean, receiving a system that you can fully customize, and that's been kind of a limitation to the conversations I've had with other simulation vendors is, oh, well, we don't have that capability, or that's a limitation that, or there's a suspension of disbelief where, it's like, oh, pretend that this is occurring. And then let me know what your reaction is to that. So it's incredible to see that, really the power's in the hands of the end user.
Yeah, I think that's important. It's a necessity.
Yeah. Yeah. And just like really any profession where ultimately deadly force is an option, similarly to the military PMC work, I'm assessing the situation before deciding to take action. I love Ken Murray's quote of, you really only have a couple of options here, when you're making those decisions. You have your tung fu, your communication skills, you have kung fu, potentially your combatives or non-lethal, and then you have your gun fu, and then your last is your run fu. And it always makes me chuckle whenever I think about it. But a question on, I think, the methodology of the curriculum is if a trainee never fires a shot during an entire simulation event, I'd imagine there still could be this incredibly valuable training. But broadly speaking, in one of your sim events, what's the idea of what the participant is saying, doing prior to ever touching a tool? I know you mentioned, you have the microphone, you can role play, but what's the expectation for the participant and the value that they're getting with these scenarios, even if they, don't necessarily draw their firearm?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I've already belabored the point on the communication aspect. I think that's huge.
Mm-hmm.
And something to even touch on too is that if you ever look at, we'll say, an OIS, and especially one that maybe, it's under review, well, they all generally go under review, but let's say one, whether it's controversial, what it is. My point is that they're not going to look at just the 10-second body cam where force was actually used. Instead, they actually look at the totality of the circumstances, right? They're going to back up 3, 4, 5 minutes, potentially 10 minutes. What led up to that? What was the conversation? What were the precursors to that? Was there anything indicative to certain behavior, et cetera? And that's kind of the beauty of Peerless, is we go so far beyond the use of force in both spectrums, or lack thereof, to answer your question, right? I'm trying to redefine in some ways what a simulator looks like and even go beyond it as a training tool. But the big thing is that their coined use of force simulators are shoot or don't shoot simulators. And that in itself is already a huge issue. It's such a small scope of law enforcement. I mean, I don't know the exact stat. Obviously, most law enforcement officers in their whole career never fire a single round, on duty outside of the range and whatnot, right? So that in itself should go to show that we still got to train on that stuff. I'm not arguing otherwise, but train on the global scope of law enforcement decision making, which is nuanced, and they're expected to be perfect. So a couple things to answer your question. First and foremost, when we create a scenario, when you hit start, the trainee screen goes black and the trainer can see the scenario before it started, and they can dispatch them. So you press a different key on the keyboard, your mic opens as the trainer, and it allows you to speak through the mic as if you're talking through a radio. And once again, another prime example of why mic input is important. AI is not going to replace your agency's dispatch protocol and lingo, right? So they use their own call signs, they use their own locations in their real world jurisdiction, and they use their own dispatch policy and protocol through and through. I don't care what LLM has, an idea of generalized dispatch. Every agency is different. Every agency is different in how they even, again, generate their call signs. So we can't have a one size fits all. So the dispatch prior is a massive important piece. And then from there, like you said, if there's no force even used, it's the decision making and them asking their rights. They're at them asking the suspect, very specific questions about the agency's policy or what they're allowed to do, right? We can go and do mundane things like two neighbors fighting over property lines. Well, you got to take it to the city. Well, he said this, I've been here, here's my flyer. I mean, little things like that we can create. So again, you're dealing with your day-to-day policing. We can go do your active shooter. We can go do your foot pursuit, and we can do it better than anyone. But it allows you to broaden the scope of training into global decision-making, which, once again, police do every single day. And a final piece, whether there's force or not, and let's say in this context there is force. Force is used in most simulators. It's done and over with. And actually, most simulators you get shot. It's just done, which is literally the most backwards thing ever. You train through the fight. I'm blown away Sims still do that to this day. But my point is, let's say someone charges at you with a knife, virtually. Force is used, and you stop the threat. In Peerless, the scenario doesn't end. We have native hand tracking where you stick out your hands, it's tracked by the cameras, and you'll actually watch people go through and pat down the suspect. They're not going to literally pat them down, just like they're not going to literally render aid, but now maybe they can detain them. So they'll put their hands behind their back, handcuff them, and we can have them walk all the way to the patrol vehicle, open the back door, get the suspect in, and follow those protocols and policies like you would if you were in a real OIS in the real world, right? You can call the dispatch real quick. Hey, by the way, shots fired, officer's okay, roll EMS. Let alone, I'm going to go now talk to a witness that just witnessed that OIS. I mean, stuff like that, you can make it intrinsic to the trainee's decision making by putting them through those reps as much as physically possible. And that's where other simulators really drastically fall short. It's just shoot or don't shoot. Like, man, that's important, but it's one very small piece of the pie.
That's actually a really good segue into our next segment for stress and consequences. You had mentioned working through the fight well above and beyond. And I mean, that's been kind of the theme of AU Fire. And I've seen that you guys have integrated a platform and peripherals because we can OC spray each other so we know what it feels like. We can tase each other so we know what it feels like, but we can't ethically shoot each other so we know what it feels like. And so, no Plan survives first contact. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. You're not going to know
Mike Tyson.
how you're going to react. Yeah, exactly. Unless you've been there and done that and know how you're going to react in that situation. Be pressure tested and vetted for cognitive responses. And so, there are many studies that suggest VR produces more stress, even without adding the stimulus, such as an AU fire system. So, um, how let's get grounded, right? Because what's your view on productive integration rather than adding stress for stress sake?
It's a really interesting question. Again, it does get in a little bit of the weeds of, maybe the training philosophy, which we definitely touch and
Mm-hmm.
have some overlap with, even though, again, I'm not here to train people, but we've already beat that one to death, right? So to me, I actually see this in other simulators and have for years. A lot of them are just, their sole source letter will be just features they do. And then it's kind of the premise of how these VR companies operate is let's just try to add on every feature possible, even if it's disingenuous and doesn't actually impact training. And something we try to do is really, again, it sounds like so basic and so obvious. And you think, why doesn't every vendor do this? But just listen to the end user, right? If you have 100 users of your simulator, and at Apex, we had another 0 on that, the amount of feedback and data you get from them using it is straight up invaluable, especially because we're nationwide. We focus
Mm-hmm.
on all 50 states, right? Even Alaska and Hawaii, right? We focus on what are their needs, what are their desires. So, kind of coming back to the scenario creation, they pick an environment to start with. So as long as we have the environment, you can do almost anything from that point. So it's giving them the tools to look and find what their training needs are. Yeah, there's sometimes hot topic things like after Uvalde was active shooter, and active shooter is always going to be big, but especially after a shooting, right, you're going to see that be prominent. So it comes down to what are they actually trying to do? AU
Mm-hmm.
Fire is very specific. Tim's an awesome dude. He has an awesome story, awesome background, and I love the product, and yeah, it's something we're integrating into Peerless as we speak, because we want to add that next level or next level, but also next element of immersion in the simulator in some ways by making it closer to realistic. But they can use it how they want. So I don't really have an answer other than as time goes on, I'm definitely
Mm-hmm.
gung ho on adding peripherals and adding all sorts of different things on the hardware side, but it needs to be impactful, right? I've got
Mm-hmm.
all sorts of projects in the back I actually can't talk about too much right now that we're working on hardware wise, but at the end of the day, it's to actually be practical and impactful. If it's not leading
Mm-hmm.
towards our North Star, our mission to eliminate preventable tragedy through repetition,
Mm-hmm.
then it's not worth the squeeze whatsoever. And I see a lot of little things like you got a shock belt, like that's cool, but what are we really doing there? Right? AU Fire is an actual
Mm-hmm.
applied ideology because it's simulating an injury in a productive way that actually allows you to train on things. So I
Mm-hmm.
don't really have an answer. I know I'm just kind of being vague on that one, but
Mm-hmm.
ultimately listen to the end user. What do they want? What do they
Yeah.
actually need? I find no vendors really do that well. They just don't
Mm-hmm.
care.
Yeah, I mean, it really sounds like adding these peripherals as a crawl, walk, run, the ability to learn and even integrate Peerless VR as an enhancement to their traditional training, an element that they can add in for additional holistic training in a crawl, walk, and maybe integrating AU Fire or peripheral would be the run phase, or even beyond that.
Yes.
Just
Well, and one thing
the
I'll add
sprint.
too, now that you've uh, put that idea back in my head, so sorry for
Mm-hmm.
interrupting, but the idea behind Peerless is just to be your universal platform, not universal in the way again training is conducted per se, or what training you're actually doing or training on. There we go. It's more so having a platform where you could add in AU Fire, where if an agency wants to do SWAT tactics, 10-man. Crazy room clearing and building clearing. I mean, we have an environment builder. The stuff you can do is out of this world as far as tactics. That's fine. We give them that platform, and we enable Peerless to be able to add in AU Fire. Likewise, as time goes on, I'd like to look at other tools like AU Fire. There's not many like them. AU Fire is pretty unique and awesome. But other tools like that, where again, it just comes down to what the agency's needs are, right? We have this philosophy of if we give them the ability to do it, then they can use it however they want, right? Some people want
Mm-hmm.
to go in and never fire a single round, and they just want to talk. That's totally fine. It doesn't matter for me. I just want to make your training impactful and more efficient. We have
Mhm.
correctional agencies, jails that use it, right? They don't have guns unless they're doing like a transport to a hospital. Some have tasers, some don't. Again, it doesn't really matter because of how open-ended it is. They can train on really what they want. So ultimately, to answer your question, I see long-term definitely having more, we'll say, additions or potential additions to the simulator with software integrations like AU Fire, where, hey, we have AU Fire and we want to just hook it up, or we'll buy AU Fire so it can work with our Peerless and train in that. That's kind of our motto moving forward. There's just not many other products like it, so it makes it
Mhm.
hard to land on another example.
Mhm. No, that's awesome. I mean, and I think I mean, that's definitely where the military is going. They don't want stovepiped platforms. I'd imagine this is where law enforcement is
Modularity.
going as where, yeah, exactly. Agnostic can work with a slew of peripherals that already exist within the training scheme at these agencies. A lot of things you mentioned are getting tracked. It's like analysis paralysis, right? But the purpose
Yes.
of training is improvement of KSAs, knowledge, skills, abilities, competency attainment, skills remediation, or even improvement, maintaining skills, especially in high acuity and low occurrence. And so, walk me through the AAR, LMS. Is there a learning management system? Are we tracking individual human performance and then consolidating that data? Once we get that data, again, analysis paralysis. What are we doing with that? Or what is available for the instructors to say, I've got this data set on participant X and he needs to improve in this aspect. He needs to maintain in this aspect. And we need to get him to the next level in this aspect.
Fantastic question. So you have just outlined, I'll say, a hurdle of my career because, as you're probably more than aware, training data can absolutely be used against someone in law enforcement, a sworn law enforcement officer, depending on what's kept. And it's a
Mm-hmm.
very, very dicey, sensitive topic. I'm the biggest law enforcement supporter you'll ever meet. I mean that. So for me, I want to be able to enable them and give them every, again, tool possible to, essentially be more prepared, right? More
Mm-hmm.
repetitions means better decisions, right? So we have tons of AAR tools. Our AAR tools allow you to review, replay. We even actually have some crazy, crazy tools we just came out with that are already live for our end users, like Scale. So I'll put it this way: after you go through any kind of scenario, force or not, doesn't matter. What you can do is go through a virtual replay. So other simulators will have some kind of virtual replay, but it's usually just a video, or they've got to come out of the headset to view a video, which is totally backwards. We have someone fully immersed in 3D in a virtual world. Why would you just not replay it in front of them? So we have a virtual
Mm-hmm.
replay where you can actually watch your former self as a silhouette in third person. Imagine taking a step back and watching yourself from a completely different angle you've never seen. I had an agency say they had a guy in FTO completely oblivious to his surroundings and just lacked situational awareness. And because Peerless is dynamic and open-ended, they actually targeted that deficiency
Mm-hmm.
1-to-1 and were able to throw props in the background, throw characters in the background that he was never aware of. In the AAR, we have a way to seal their field of view. That's one of the one of the many options, excuse me. And a lot of times you'll see guys that have a head on a swivel when they spawn in and finally go into the environment. Look behind them and see that guy with a cell phone. They don't look behind them and see another person. They don't see a brick on the ground. They don't see a weapon. They don't see shell casings, whatever it is. So Peerless enables them to be able to do, that kind of stuff very, very, very natively. And the
Mm-hmm.
replay also allows you to scale the trainee up. So imagine now, instead of standing behind yourself, you're 3, 4, 5 times the size and you're looking down in a 3D sixed off, replay of what you just went with, right? That gas station you're just at now is 1/3 the size, and you're able to look above it and tabletop and move your head in ways you've never been able to review anything training wise in law enforcement ever. I mean, it's untapped potential. You can save those, load them later. To answer your question though, training data beyond that is very sensitive. We don't keep it. Even the replays, if you want to save it, it is an
Mm-hmm.
absolutely manual option. You must hit yes every time. There's no auto save. The
Mm-hmm.
vast majority of law enforcement agencies throughout the country, depending on the state, it's generally, I think, the state that dictates it, are extremely not liable, but it's just can be used against them in court if they're in an OIS. And they can go now pull this data back up. Anything possible in that can be used against them will be used. So we try not to capture that kind of data, right? If you notice in most law enforcement training, it is uh, pass or fail. It's very straightforward. You don't keep the numbers to a certain extent. It's not universal, so I'm definitely generalizing. But in my experience, in my
Mm-hmm.
almost 9 years of doing this, my whole adult career, we're moving the needle on that a little bit, but it's a legal system that holds us back there. If you
Mm-hmm.
capture training data, it's absolutely going to be used against you in court. And again, that's kind of what I'm not even kind of that's what our mission is trying to eliminate preventable tragedy. Now it's through repetition, but the irony would be if that training data could be used against them. So we don't capture anything right now. We have very limited ways to export and track that. A lot of times too, we just tell people, as stupid as it is, it's not the answer you're looking for, or some agencies are looking for, even though it's rare, is track it by hand, do something different. The liability associated with keeping sensitive training data like that, especially in a lot of times use of force context, is just something that design wise we like to stay away from. I'm sure something will tip the scale eventually as time goes on. But again, working with thousands of law enforcement agencies, it's definitely the majority are like, I'd love to use that as proper data. I think yourself and I can look at that and go, that's probably pretty limiting. Data is super powerful. But again, it's the legal system and the liability
Mm-hmm.
associated with it. So the trade-off of keeping that right now is globally not worth the scale in the U.S.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We need something
So
to change.
yeah, synthesizing that, it sounds like the position is allow the agency to make that determination.
Yeah, we want to give them
Mm-hmm.
again tools, but our fear is it's accidentally turned on, and now the laptop's subpoenaed and it has training records or training data on it.
Mm-hmm.
And again, now it's
Mm-hmm.
just ruin someone's life, or potentially ruin someone's life, even if they were likely, or it made it at least worse, even if they're totally justified in what they did.
Mm-hmm. Well,
So
I
it's
want to
something
go
we just stuck
back.
away from.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to go back to the guy behind the participant with the cell phone, right? Social
Yes.
media and public eye performance.
Hmm.
Law enforcement, military, it's always been a very challenging profession. Um, always in the public eye, scrutinized by the backseat lawyers from the comfort from behind their screens. Situations and incidences are filmed, they're narrated. I mean, you can just go on YouTube and probably in your For You pages, all these, backseat lawyers. Um, do I guess the question is, do we train to the standards of professionalism, and is that just embedded in the training platforms, or do we expect officers to train and be desensitized, and build courseware that experiences bystanders with cameras? Um, because actually when I was preparing for this discussion, I was thinking, I mean, is there even value in desensitized training where even where there's social media backlash, where a part of the AAR just has maybe LLM or some sort of AI algorithm that generates based on the performance, 2 or 3 social media posts, kind of slandering all of their action, regardless of whether they feel they did great or not.
It's a loaded question. It's a good one though. So,
Mm-hmm.
a couple different things. I know I've been ranting about the mic input and outdated simulators, but seriously, it's a big limitation. A lot of your projector-based sims still have 2/3, 3/4 of their scenarios they recorded in 1991 before I was born, and they reflect that. So the videos are going to be older vehicles. They're not going to be people with cell phones. They might be in a school shooter in the lockers, or again, just super ancient. And that not only
Mm-hmm.
takes you out of the immersion factor, but it makes it unrealistic with how modern policing is going. Right? If we look at society and how it advances, especially with technology, law enforcement is usually behind, and that's not a shot at law enforcement, and actually very far from it. It's because of the policy and procedures put in place on procurement and then the adoption of technology. So companies like ourselves who have above and beyond the most next gen technology. Even the other VR simulators, most of their tech's from really like 2020. It's very outdated, let alone their content criteria. What happens is that you now have a gap. So if your platform isn't flexible to be able to actually put those things in, then it's just going to continuously fall behind more and more and more. Again, Peerless is special because, yeah, we can literally go and drag and place a suspect, or excuse me, a civilian, or anyone, could even be a suspect, with a cell phone behind the trainee and just sit them there. I do it in almost every scenario I do for a demonstration, and I see a lot of agencies do it just for, again, in that AAR piece of being able to recognize it later. The LLM generating a video is very interesting. I will say, however, in the replay, because of all the functionality we can do, it's essentially happening virtually. It's the same thing unfolding, just the trainee's not doing it, we can actually go look from the civilian's perspective with a cell phone. It might not be literally their camera phone, but the idea is that we can go and watch and get an idea what that looks like. We also have body cam view. So imagine you have multiple trainees in there, right? Trainee 2, we in the replay, doesn't matter what we looked at before, we can always go back and look from any angle later, no matter what. Let's say in the replay we go to body cam 2 and trainee 1 is using force. They can get an idea and perspective of what that would look like. I think the extrapolation of this is what would be posted on social media, as far as the headlines and the one-liners, I'm gonna stay away from, because I'm too creative and I can come up with some good ones, but I got to stay professional. But my point is that that kind of comes down to the trainer, right? The trainer should go, hey, look from the trainee 2's body cam here, right? Look how you verbalize certain things. Look at your posturing, whatever it is, since those are shown in the replay. Things like that can be inferred, even though it's not directly what you're asking. I can promise you, Peerless is going to give you a much better perspective of reflect on what just happened. What is that going to look like in the public's eyes, let alone social media?
Awesome. Let's go into the future of Peerless. What's the next leap beyond just better graphics? Where's XR training going to get meaningfully better training outcomes?
It's a fantastic question. I think, again, these other vendors fall short because they come in and slot it as another simulator. And honestly, I'll be totally real with you. I think a lot of them just want to make a quick buck, right? Whether they're not US based or they just come in and do the same thing everyone's been doing for years, but they add a new technology to it. It's not true innovation. And for us at Peerless, our goal, again, and I'll keep saying it, but maybe we'll rephrase it this time. But our mission is to make sure no officer faces a situation they haven't already seen, right? We have people go in to criminal justice for 2 years, and then they go through the academy for 5, 6, 7, 8 months. I mean, they have a ton of time before and then they go on FTO, obviously, too. They have a ton of time before they go on their first call, but it's still not efficient enough. And that's, again, a big piece of where Peerless comes in. As far as the technology's there. We absolutely have things we're innovating on all the time. Something I'm big on is that Apex, even though the hardware stayed the same, which is a little bit out of my control in some ways, is we want to continuously innovate through and through. A lot of it's going to be on software. A lot of it's going to be based on feedback and working with our end users. But it's really pumping up that piece in itself. So 2 things to answer your question. It's going to be, once again, accessibility. It needs to be more accessible to agencies. We're being creative in the procurement process and how it's paid for, essentially, where they can get it a lot easier. Even little things like we have a quick turnaround time. We have a lot built, so we get 4 POs in a week. We can serve all of them. But beyond that is going to be the community piece. So something that no other simulator is doing. We're already doing this, but I'm going to times it by 10 as time goes on, is the feedback element. I told you at Apex, we had what's called roundtables. And essentially every 2 weeks, folks would hop on and listen to what we're developing as a dev team and the value we find behind it. And then at the latter half, we would listen to end users and their experiences. Sometimes it'd be, you're funny. How do I show the stats? And that's cool. No worries. But it might be then we get 3 or 4 that are really nuanced ideas that we didn't think of and consider that we can now implement. And it allows us to have a back and forth conversation. So that was really powerful. So at Peerless, we have what's called the community hub, and no vendor is doing this. I've never seen any vendor of any kind do this in law enforcement, by the way, or GovTech. But essentially, the community hub is a one-stop shop it's where we do our support. And I don't even call it tech support. And to be honest with you, we have so little with how so easy it is to set up. I mean, we set up in 1 minute, give or take, maybe 2 on a bad day. Like that's a completely new ball game in training simulators. Like I said earlier, the fastest portable one, probably 30, 45 minutes. And again, I've tried all of them hands-on. So the community piece allows, beyond support, to have that feedback in real time. Anyone can go and give feedback, ask questions, have a discussion with other trainers, share presets. So you see this in very technical communities like Raspberry Pi or something, right? They'll have a bunch of people that go and build programs, repositories for it, and it's all publicly available. And you essentially have a big community that drives the system. And likewise, we want to do the same. We're big believers in essentially not having us dictate the training or train the end user. So by having a community hub, people can go and download presets from other agencies. We already include some of them, but imagine going and downloading a specific one for rural agencies. Well, sheriff's offices around the country will eat it up, right? Or imagine doing something, in I guess a gas station's not a good context, but like an apartment complex, municipalities will probably eat that up, even though that applies to both, right? Stuff like that is a big piece of it. And finally, again, is the feedback. By having forums instead of a call that hopefully you can hop on every 2 weeks, it allows people to get feedback immediately and get their ideas put in. I had someone ask us this weekend about a very specific feature because it's so easy to go and type immediately on their day off. They just came up with an idea and they're able to post it. It was actually some shoot house stuff we already did. So it was cool to go, hey, we already have an environment builder and shoot house stuff. You'll love it. Another one was like shields. One of our sheriff's offices wanted riot and ballistic shields. And we said, all right, cool. Send us a picture of literally your physical shields. And we modeled those and put it in the following update for Peerless a month later. So 30 days later, that agency got their voice heard. They got the software update and feature they asked for at no cost whatsoever. It came a month later too, by the way. And now every single other agency using Peerless now gets to use a feature that another law enforcement agency asked for. So it makes it so much closer to what folks are actually looking for by taking their feedback and taking it in stride. Your end users are one of your most powerful advocates. They've already bought your system. And now they're telling you, hey, this might make it better. People are crazy for not running with that. The amount of stories I hear working, hey, we worked with this other vendor. They're absolutely horrible. Their tech support's terrible. All these explicitives because they're bad people because of it. I mean, it's commonplace. And I think it's something that all other vendors really fall short on, and we do the complete opposite for. So to answer your question, long term, we're always innovating. We're always iterating on the solution through and through. But the biggest iteration as time goes on beyond accessibility, which we're always trying to work towards, every agency should have access to this level of training, a world-class simulator, is also listening to them, continuously iterate on the software. What do you folks need? What do you folks want? How do we make this better for you? Because it makes it better for us. And there's no other vendor I've ever seen work in that way, at least in this GovTech space.
Yeah, sometimes simpler is better. I mean, yeah, and I hope everybody listening to this understands the gravity of what you're saying. I mean, this is such a simplistic concept, but you have a hive mind community evolution and adaptation feedback loop and iterative model, whatever acronym that that spells out. That's quite incredible.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's go ahead and close with our lightning round. These are ChatGPT generated prompts. I've got 4 questions for you. First question, one belief about training you used to have that you now think was wrong.
The fidelity of training, the extent of training done nowadays is still good. It's still great. And in a lot of ways it always has. And I find that agencies are genuinely always trying to improve. So you asked me earlier as well, what do you think can change in training in a way, and kind of an adjacent question. Ultimately, the fidelity of training done is really great. And obviously Peerless enables that very, very efficiently. But that's kind of what I landed on, is that the accessibility of training is actually, again, the biggest model, like even beyond simulators, right? A lot of times you go to a shoot house, like you have a balcony, you have walls everywhere. I mean, it is a super sketchy, dangerous environment because we want to train that much closer to what it's like in the real world. But the logistics, the cost, the resources, the time is very expensive for a law enforcement agency that has to police the city they're working in, or the county they're working in, or whatever jurisdiction it is. So I beat this horse very dead, this discussion today. But I think it's important that, again, the accessibility, even beyond the simulator, is the limitation. Having access to this kind of training in a way that they could do almost every single day is the problem with training globally.
Mm-hmm. What's the most overhyped feature in law enforcement training tech?
That's a really good one. I find definitely, man, I could answer this in 10 different ways, but I want to give you a really good answer. The most overhyped tech. I mean, I would almost say the active shooter element. Every simulator does active shooter, and VR is cool because it allows you to walk around and move around. That's great. We should be able to do that. But again, we've had, other ways to train that for a long time, even though it's still resource intensive. And again, we alleviate that bottleneck, but it's the idea that simulators are just use of force. Like, man, we have an amazing technology to make it decision making. And one massive piece of that is absolutely going to be your mass shooter, active shooter, school shooter. No doubt. I'm not saying otherwise. And I promise you, you try our sim, it's going to blow everything out of the water in that facet. But it's a small piece. And every simulator has been doing that for years. And yes, we improved it with VR drastically. And we definitely took it to the next level with our tracking fidelity, being able to do, massive 11,000 square feet, larger than any other simulator, being able to use it outside. I mean, no sim does that. So we've alleviated those bottlenecks, but it's the use of force piece. We've had that forever. We do it better,
Yeah.
but man, it's the decision making, the global scale of what does a law enforcement officer deal with on patrol on a daily basis.
Makes sense. I think you've answered this pretty articulately, but the most underrated skill for officer safety, not firearms.
Yeah, absolutely. Communication I'll wrap in decision making. Right, when you are in an OIS and an agency has to review said OIS or any kind of use of force, right? They're looking at the totality of the circumstances. Now, we have the benefit of hindsight, obviously, when we're reviewing it, but excuse me, officers don't, deputies don't, right? So ultimately it's the building up to even the use of force or lack thereof, right? How much use of force could have been negated because of the conversation prior, seeing precursors prior, right? That's obviously a unanswerable question. There's truly no way to know. I mean, that's some butterfly effect stuff. But at the end of the day is the more repetitions we can have that encapsulate larger than use of force, realistically, just better outcomes, more safer outcomes, fewer tragedies. So it's definitely, again, the totality of the circumstances, being able to, go into a scenario that may involve use of force, but it can go almost and really any direction you want.
Awesome. TJ, great to have you on the TCP, the Champions Path program. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, likewise, Jared. Thanks for having me. This was fantastic.